Hello boys and girls, this is Miss Coville, and this lesson is for all 5th graders at Bethune Elementary. I am teaching this lesson today on adding and subtracting fractions in word problems. This is day 2, lesson 11, and we will be focusing on standard NF2. This standard tells us that we will be solving word problems involving addition and subtraction of fractions, including cases of unlike denominators. And some key words that we will be hearing within this video will be compare. And when we compare, we will be using the less than, greater than, or equal to symbol, and that will tell us if we're comparing the value of one fraction to another. Now let's keep in mind and make sure that you stop and jot notes as you view this video. Study the example problem showing comparing numbers by using the benchmark fraction 1/2. Then we will solve problems 1 through 5. Ricky and his brother Lorenzo both have to practice for an upcoming karate tournament. Ricky practices for 3/8 hour and Lorenzo practices for 3/4 hour. Which brother practices for a longer time? Compare both numbers to the benchmark fraction 1/2. We're going to look at the number line, and our number line is broken up into how many equal parts, boys and girls? Where it's broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's broken up into 8 equal parts. And we will be comparing the amount of time that each brother practiced to 1/2, which is right here. Now the number line shows that 3/8 is less than 1/2, and 3/4 is greater than 1/2. Now, if we were to look solely at 3/4, some of you might think 3/4 will be less than 1/2 because 4 is the denominator. But if we see that these are unlike denominators and we need to have like denominators, so our least common multiple of 4 and 8 will be 8. So let's go ahead and change 3/4 to the common denominator of 8. So if you look to the right of the screen in this area, we have turned 3/4 into an equivalent fraction, and we had to multiply 3/4 by a common fraction, which will be 2/2, and it gave us 6/8. Now our fractions are equivalent, and it will help us better identify and compare the value of each fraction. So now that we see right here, 3/4 could be the same, is the same, and is the equivalent fraction to 6/8. So now we see that 3/4 is greater than 1/2. 3/4 right here is greater than 1/2 right here. So if we were to use our symbols greater than or less than, we would say 3/8 is less than 3/4, which is right here, and 3/4 is greater than, right here, 3/8. Now let's move on. All right, boys and girls, so number 1 says, use the number line in the example problem to compare each fraction below to 1/2. Write each fraction in the correct box. So we will be looking at these fractions right here, and we will be comparing them and seeing if they are less than 1/2, which one is equal to 1/2, and which one is greater than 1/2. And we're going to use the number line above in order to help us. So 6/8. So as I stated before, each notch is an eighth on our number line. So we're going to count 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6/8, which is equivalent to 3/4. So 6/8 is greater than 1/2. So we're going to write that in the greater than 1/2 area. So we know that 6/8 is greater than 1/2. So we're going to put 6/8 right here. Now let's go to 3/4. We just stated 3/4 and 6/8 are equivalent fractions, and we know that they are both greater than 1/2. So let's go ahead and write that down. Greater than 1/2. 3/4. 1/4. Let's go ahead and count 1/4. Now, keep in mind, 1/4 is not equivalent to eighths on our number line. So let's go ahead and figure out where 1/4 would go. So as you see to the right, in order to make 1/4 equivalent to eighths, we had to multiply it by a like fraction. Our like fraction will be 2/2. So we multiplied 1 times 2, our numerator, and we got 2. 4 times 2, which is our denominator, and we got 8. So now we have equivalent fractions, and 2 over 8, let's count it on our number line. 1, 2. 2/8 is right here, and that is less than 1/2. So we will write that in our less than 1/2 area. So 1/4 is less than 1/2. Now let's go ahead and go to our next one. 5/8. 5/8. Let's use our number line and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5/8 is above 1/2, so that means it's greater than. So let's go ahead and write that in our greater than section. 5/8. Our next one, 2/4. Again, 2/4. It is not equivalent to 8. So what must we do, boys and girls? That's right. We need to change our denominator into an equivalent and make this an equivalent fraction. So let's go ahead and do that on your own now. All right, boys and girls, so now we have turned 2/4 into an equivalent fraction. We've multiplied it by a like fraction, 2 over 2, and we got 4 over 8. Now, if I were to see 4 over 8, I would think to myself, well, my number line is the exact same thing as 4 over 8. I would simplify. So in order to simplify, I need to divide my fraction by another like fraction, which will be 4 over 4. And I can divide 4 by 4 evenly and get 1. I can divide 8 by 4 evenly and get 2. And that gives me 1/2. So that means 2 over 4, which is the fraction we're looking at to start off with right here. 2 over 4 is equal to 1/2 right here. So let's go ahead and write that down in our chart. 2 over 4. Now let's go ahead and go to our next one, 7/8. And let's go ahead and count that on our number line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7/8 is greater than 1/2. So that will go in our greater than tab. 7/8. And let's go ahead and look at 2/8. 2/8. Let's go ahead and count that out on our number line. 1, 2. 2/8 is less than 1/2. So let's go ahead and write 2/8. Make sure you're writing this down in your packet, and let's move to the next page. So we're now on the next page to question 2. It says you can also use the number 1 as a benchmark. Use the fractions from the box right here. And we're going to write each fraction that is either greater than 1, less than 1, or equal to 1. So let's go ahead and look at our fractions. So we're going to start right here at 1/3. 1/3. Would 1/3 be greater than 1, less than 1, or equal to 1? 1/3 will be less than 1. So let's go ahead and write that down on the side. As I write my answers on the side in this space, you need to go ahead and write them in the correct space on your page. So now we've taken care of 1/3, and we said 1/3 is less than 1. So let's go to the next number, 4/3. When I look at 4/3, this is what, boys and girls? This is an improper fraction. So that means when we have an improper fraction, our numerator is larger than our denominator. If our numerator is larger than our denominator, that means we need to turn it into a mixed number. And if we turn it to a mixed number, that means we will have a whole number and a fraction. So if it's a whole number and a fraction, that means this 4/3 will be what? Greater than 1. Good job, boys and girls. So let's go ahead and put 4/3 over here in our section that is greater than 1. Let's go to the next one. 12 over 15. It's still a fraction, so that means it will be what? Less than 1. So we're going to put 12 over 15 in our area that is less than 1. Let's move on. 3/10. It is still a fraction, so it is, again, less than 1. 3/10. 7/5. 7 over 5. Our numerator is greater than our denominator. So that means it's what? It's an improper fraction. And that means it will be greater than 1. 3 over 3. 3 over 3. When I have the same number over itself, or a like fraction, 3 over 3 is the same as what, boys and girls? 1. Good job. So that means it's going to be equal to 1. 3 over 3. 2 over 5. 2 over 5. That will be less than 1. And 16 over 10. 16 over 10, that is what, boys and girls? Good job, an improper fraction, which means it needs to be turned into a mixed number, and that will make it greater than 1. 16 over 10. Let's move on. Which fraction from problem 2 is greater than 1 1/2, and explain how you know. Now 1 1/2 is what? 1 1/2 is a mixed number. So that means let's go ahead and identify the fractions that we stated would be mixed numbers. 16 over 10 needs to be turned into a mixed number. 12 over 15 needs to be turned into a mixed number. And 7 over 5 needs to be turned into a mixed number. So let's go ahead and do that on our own, or explain how we know. All right, boys and girls, so let's look at our work on the side. So you should have created all of your improper fractions and turned them into a mixed number. So let's go ahead and see how we did that. So in order to create 4/3 into a mixed number, we need to see how many times can 3 go into our numerator. 4. It can go over 1 time. So that means if we have one whole is represented as 3 over 3. Now, our 1 whole is represented as 3 over 3. So I would do 4 minus 3, and now I have 1 left over. So I have 1 whole, and now I have 1/3 left over, because again, our denominator always stays the same. So let's work out 7 over 5. 7 over 5, 5 can go into 7 evenly 1 time. So that means 5 over 5 is a 1 whole. 7 minus 5, I have 2 left over. So I have my 1 whole, and I have 2/5, because my denominator stays the same. And my last one, 16 over 10. 10 can go into 16 1 time. So that's 1 whole. So I would do 10 over 10. And I'm going to see how much I would have left over. 16 minus 10 is 6. So I have 1 whole, and I have 6 left over, and my denominator stays the same. Now question 3 asks us, which fraction from problem 2 is greater than 1 1/2, and explain how do we know. So 1 1/3, is that greater than 1 1/2? No. 1 2/5, is that greater than 1 1/2? No. 1 6/10, is that greater than 1 1/2? I believe so. And why would 1 6/10 be greater than 1/2? Let's see. Half of 10 will be 5. So that means 1 1/2 for this problem would mean it would be 1 5/10. But I have 1 6/10, which means that is 1 greater than 1 1/2. So I know that 1 6/10 is greater than 1 1/2. Now let's write this down on how we know in complete sentences. So we're going to write, I know that 16 over 10 is greater than 1 1/2. Because I know that 10 over 10 equals 1. And 16 over 10 is 10 over 10 plus 6 over 10, or 1 6/10. I also know that 6 over 10 is more than 5 over 10, or 1/2. Therefore, 16 over 10, or 1 6/10, is greater than 1 1/2. Make sure you write this down, boys and girls. Now let's move to the next question. Number 4 says, You can also model comparisons to 1/2 using fraction strips. Write the greater than symbol, equal symbol, or less than symbol to compare each set of fractions. So again, we're going to use our fraction strips right here to compare the values of each fraction. So let's start with 2/3. We're going to compare the value of 2/3 to 1/2. So let's look at our 2/3 fraction strip and compare it to our 1/2. So let's see, 2/3 is greater than 1/2 because our 2/3 strips go over our 1/2. It goes over this much right here. So we're going to put right here, I'm going to write it on the right hand side. You're going to write it in the actual place right here. You're going to put the greater than symbol, and the greater than symbol is right there. So in 4, for the first one, you're going to put 2/3 is greater than 1/2. Let's go to our next one. 2/6 and 1/2. So we're going to look at our 2/6 strip bar right here, and we're going to compare it to 1/2. Our 2/6 strip lands us right here. So that means 2/6 is less than 1/2. So we're going to write 2/6, the less than symbol, and 1/2. Boys and girls, remember the less than symbol looks like an L, less than. And we're going to go to our last one. So it says, so 2/3 will be what compared to 2/6? 2/3 up here, we're going to compare the value to 2/6. So that means 2/3 up here would indefinitely be greater than 2/6 right there. So 2/3 is greater than 2/6. Let's move on to question 5.